United States, this new book, but I would imagine, Tad reached out to me, a couple months ago and asked if I'd be willing to sit in conversation with him. As y'all heard, I am now a road radical headmistress. So many of us are thinking about what it means and what it looks like to resist what is going on today, and even not just about the Trump administration, although the Trump administration in the last 10 years has brought so much to the forefront in terms of the assaults and the attacks on our democratic norms and institutions. But so many of us are finding us questioning American myths that we've been told, and for some of us who work in to be able to have this discussion and to compare notes, so to speak, between a historian and myself from the journalism world is a real honor. How could I resist talking about resistance we've had so long? Right into it, Tad, can you tell us, first of all, I personally like to hear why someone decides to write this book now. I'd love for you to define some of the terms that we're going to be using tonight. So what do you mean by resistance? What do you mean by power? And what do you mean by abuse? Right? So yes, first of all, why now?
I really wish I had a fantastic story. I wish I had an engaging story about that sort of dove into my sense of purpose, that built into my career and my ideas that sort of formulated about American history. The reason why I wrote it is because my editor asked me to. He is somewhere here. It is Chip Fleischer's fault. Thank you, Chip. But the idea is that as anybody who's kind of been a part of this community for a long time, or even, and there are some of you in this audience who have known me for decades, so thank you for being here. And so old friends and new friends who understand the kind of work that I have been doing. There she is. That the kind of work that I have been doing, people holding me accountable for 25 years, to sort of understand about this idea that one of the things that we have always been coming up against in American politics, and I got my start here in 10 years working on the Hill and off the Hill, is this idea that our founding is determinative, not just influential in our understanding of the world around us, our political life, our political behavior, our political identity. It's determinative. That every single discussion comes back to having to be ratified by James Madison. Everyone's an originalist, particularly now. Everyone's an originalist. It's not just this idea that our founding moment can be influential in understanding, maybe intentions, and that we are better off being informed by everything that's happened over the subsequent 250 years to take those words and make them mean something else. And that's really the story. But we erase that. We erase Alice Paul. Right? We erase the real work of Federal Douglass. We erase Ida Wells. Right? We erase these folks who, in fact, not just wrote and acted to change those words for them to mean something else. They paid the price. They paid the highest price for this. Did we tell those stories? Do we talk about Alice Paul? You don't have the 19th Amendment without Alice Paul. And yet her story is one that informs the way in which struggle has in fact resulted in what we see as being the greatest expansions of liberty in our entire history. And so what I kind of saw through a lot of my work as a historian and as a public historian was that disconnect, particularly as I got deeper and deeper into historical scholarship, that disconnect between what we understand as what in fact happened, what they in fact meant, but more to the point, what have we done to that over the span of 250 years and to freight it with a weight that, to be honest, The people who created it never asked for it. But it's a part of our mythology, part of the evolution of that storytelling of those myths that has started to operate in this exceptionally powerful, and like I said, determinative way. And it is that kind of hamster wheel that I see us as being stuck on. And so much of my work has been about how do we break that down? How do we slow the hamster wheel? How do we get people to understand that, in fact, they're on one, so maybe they can do one.
You, just now, you're a historian, specifically a public historian. What is the delineation, and how do you see the role of the public historian, perhaps vis-a-vis, not competition necessarily, but just as different, perhaps, than creating perhaps only for the academy?
Yeah, and so I'm kind of both. I'm both an academic historian and a public historian. All of my training, Johns Hopkins, UVA, Harvard, is all about that scholarship. And my main focus, it was about understanding American political culture and its evolution during the American Revolution. I wanted to understand loyalists. That was the question I unpacked. I wanted to understand if, this was a question that I explored in graduate school, was that last line of the Declaration, about pledging our lives and fortunes in our statehood. So I wanted to find out, was that true? We'll leave honor to the side. I still don't know what honor is, but so lives and fortunes I can figure out. Was it true? That's a hell of a statement for Jefferson, right? And it sort of does a lot of work for us today, but it's like even with the 250s, we don't ask, was it true? Were they in fact doing it? And so I really wanted to understand in that, and all of the principles that were in the Declaration, who could say no to that? What kind of tool, what kind of asshole would you have to be to say no to those rights and principles? How much would you really have to love a tyrannical monarchy in order for you to say no to any of that? What was that motivation? And it was in unpacking that with the kind of training that I had in what's called the Atlantic School. It's an inherently, by definition, non-national academic approach. Meaning that in its reaction to the kind of national approaches that most people learn about American history, which is really just, it's a history of the United States. America's colonial period really only matters in terms of how it informed the United States. It's really about the 13 colonies, and it's really sort of about how do we race through the resistance period in America and the War for Independence to get through to the Constitution, and then we're off and running to the First Republic. But that only tells the story of the growth of this particular nation state, of this particular Constitution, not of the 27, 32 colonies that the British had that sort of inform everything going on in the Atlantic world. So the sort of a long way to talk about it is that it is taking a broader approach to understand, in fact, all of the things that are going on in the 18th century and the late 18th century, all of those forces and how they're relating to one another, what they mean and don't mean, and then move forward from there, and then you can understand the U.S. a little more. So that's kind of my training as an academic historian. But my first job out of graduate school was not as an academic historian. It was a colonial linguist. There you go. So I had an offer at the University of Richmond there, where I could have gone to colonial history. But when I was a kid, I loved colonial history. I loved colonial history. Methodology, right? I mean, I thought it was great, and because this is a white people's fantasy land, of course I thought it was. And the one thing it was my dream job to work at, and they offered me the historical content of all the program, and I started to do that job, but I disconnect between what I thought about and my training in terms of the scholarship and what people were thinking. You know, at that point, there were 750,000 people going down the Duke of Gloucester Street. And what they were saying about what they now related to them was strikingly different than anything that I learned. That I knew my American Revolution was their American Revolution. What I knew, Washington, Thomas Jefferson, and black loyalists, and Ona Judge and Nancy Nixon was not not represented. And I became fascinated by that gap. And that gap is where public history was. That gap isn't taking the scholarship and trying to get it out there to broad audiences, although it's that. It's about understanding and in fact connecting it with in ways that they understand and that they can move with. Because we saw the power of that in terms of informing behavior, because how powerful the farming is in informing our identity and our political behavior. We know the reality out of that, so you can in fact understand what the Patriots and understand orients your entire approach to what America means and what it can mean, what really is the birth of this that we sort of take for granted, but we assign to those guys who had nothing whatsoever to do with it. And so all of this change that we assign to them, that in fact is a product of other people that are a hell of a lot more like you than like them. You start thinking about those stories. Ordinary people, you all are extraordinary people, but these were challenges, starting off with what? Nothing. But a value, an idea, a sense of being pissed off. It's a good place to start resistance. But how do you start from that one? You build something that in fact, if you have an American identity that's built, you can start to change this. Because ordinary people did, not many of us, not privileged white guys whose every moment of every day was made possible by the way that they brutalized other people. No, that they didn't do these things. And that's a more story. That's American identity. The American identity is, no, I got this. That's a much different way to kind of approach it, and it doesn't need validation from James Madison. That's the kind of thing that pisses me off. Public history. It's not just making scholarship more accessible to broader audiences, but it's making it matter. But part of that involves, I mean, you know this better than I do in terms of trying to go ahead. More readers need to know about something. They're so much better at it than I am. To be able to go ahead and take that out and that it's not manipulative. The discipline of being a historian, you gotta get it right, or else what the hell are you? And so part of the game of being a public historian, why I find it a very exciting space to work in. And this is a civic responsibility to be able to represent history that way to you. I go on for a long time.
This is great, and this ties into the history. You say this is the chapters. We have 9 diagnostic principles of resistance, and you use 9 examples throughout history, well, specifically 1676 through the 1870s, right? To be able to diagnose, how do you, and you say specifically how to distinguish genuine resistance from performance, builds from individual acts to organized networks, how resistance confronts the question of violence, form structure. So can you talk about, or I can list out the 9 diagnostic principles for you to talk about, or I can list it. Your first diagnostic principle is beware false prophets. So can you example used to illustrate this diagnostic principle?
Yeah, the historical example uses, but there are a lot of them, but he fits the bill. Most resistance is killed before it ever gets going. It's just traffic.
Well, you talk about it, and then this is a big part. We talk about resistance, but what I definitely appreciate about what you're trying to get us to also focus on is how this is transforms it, how it sort of does jitsu on it, and sometimes feels this is designed specifically.
And we can go back to, I was so rude, I didn't answer your discussion about sort of defining our terms, I'm sorry. Resistance. This can be a very ishy, very mushy word that kind of gets confused with all kinds of organized opposition. And it's sort of identifying that that's not really how it works. First and foremost, it's a right you have. And you know where we have that right articulated best? You know more about the list of grievances, including the grievances that didn't make it into the final version, than you know about the right of the people to of its ends. As clearly stated as anything in the document, more clearly stated than most things in the document. Jefferson not inventing anything, sort of articulating this as part of your natural rights. You can alter or abolish a government that becomes. That's resistance. It is that process of altering or abolishing that government. And then, but part of what resist against, we took after that sort of authority and abuse of authority, it's and using it to achieve other ends, not yours. There you go, that's abuse of authority. Taking a government that is created out of your consent and the power that gives them to do something for themselves. Maybe to go after someone else, maybe a resort. The kind of examples that we did sort of list today are legion. To take all of your, not just your, there's that, but the power that in fact you give to the federal government to achieve another ownership of people. Your own personal private gain, and you're going to bake that into a judiciary, you're going to bake that into control of Congress, and you're going to metastasize that over the course of decades, because that's an abuse of power in the most expansive, fundamental form. So that's what we're talking about. The resistance is the process of altering or abolishing that government that's become destructive of its ends, and to operate in ways that do not further your interests, that further the interests of one or a few. And that is not all you have to do is look at how it's working. And how it's intentions before that, we can sort of situate that in idea how people are using these things that are applied. And so when we think about like a false way, think about the principles all flow from how people have in fact acted to forward that process in American history. And it's got to really be about real people doing real things. It cannot be something I think has a kind of is like something else. I can't show you an orange and then try to sell you that it's an apple. These have got to be orange. If these diagnostic principles can be effective, I can't sell you a bill of goods about that. If I want it to, in fact, matter to you in a way that's useful, I can't make that up. These are real people in real moments, focusing on challenges. I have to make those as real as possible. That's why I deeply care about putting you in the moment in these chapters. So you can try to sort of get and understand that there's not a whole lot separating them from you, other than some structural challenges. And so if you sort of understand that's what's deeply important. These aren't sort of extraordinary moments. That could be, or you could be Nancy. how you could be on the judge, how you could be Henry David Thoreau. All these different roles. And so when I think about this as a structure, starting with somebody like Nathaniel Bacon, it's having to make sure that I'm not just like reaching for a story I just deeply wanted to tell. And I think that that's no fair. I mean, it's got to in fact work. And so most resistance efforts start with a grievance. But that grievance, and you all see it now, that grievance creates energy, right? It togetherness, a sense of sort of common purpose. It creates a goal. It creates a drive. And there is nothing more that other people want to do than to grab that and use it. And so to identify that sort of as a primary thing, again, thinking about function, Daniel Bacon is Daniel Bacon is top of that list.
I want to get through some of the for some people they maybe the characters that you have us follow, and specifically on a judge. And for me, also not just characters, but even how I thought about the Salem witch trials, which you use as an example of the unconfessed who are great from history. But before we get to it's really interesting and at least felt very true. You talk about the evidence that you studied, and that there are two interruption points at which resistance tends to be culturally and structurally interrupted. Can you talk about those two interruptions?
Yeah, so that process, that one of the things that was sort of interesting in doing a deep dive into not just actually understanding what resistance really means, I had to look at resistance everywhere. And to sort of see, so I had to step outside the United Southeast Asia, resistance in Europe, just sort of like, I had an idea what I was talking about, but you gotta sort of understand what this really means in the context. And so I looked deeply and particularly in Europe and sort of the pole star resistance, Europe in World War II. And when we think of resistance, right? Or Casablanca, right? All good examples, but thinking about, okay, can we in fact take anything that's useful in that and apply it to our context? And if we can't, why not? And that's where I think about them as choke points, but as interruption points. What has kept resistance efforts in America escalating to the point where they can achieve structural change? Why did the resistance to the enslaved world cost 750,000 lives? Why? If the mythology goes, if we have a genius for if in fact this is part of the American character to recognize injustices and resolve them, 80 years, 750,000 dead. Meanwhile, they might have paid for it. Then the British fought their way out of great, but scoreboard punishment. It didn't cost lives. Really think about, well, what was it? Yeah, there are some the constitutional structures, but what really were the things that really from being able to escalate that were particular to American political culture, the evolution, the way American political history evolved, and that's kind of what I discovered at these. What in fact stopped people from being. Is the first one is the sort of that we have a sort of a legal cap on things, right? So,
When things become criminal,
yeah,
right? When we say, okay, we're going to protest, but we're not going to break any laws.
yeah,
We're going to make sure that it's yes.
yeah.
And then that's at the point when you realize that your petitions aren't working, that the normal channels aren't. The point is the question of buying. many people, when they get to this point, when everything else has failed, are they willing to cross that threshold, or do they fracture?
Yeah.
So I'd be curious, when people, I know this was, when I started my resistance summer school, when people hear the word resistance, they often think, are you advocating for violence, right? Are you advocating for, well, not just maybe, violence, but to destroy the institutions that our founders, right? And you say this, that American political culture has evolved specifically to protect the mythical founders at all costs. So how do you respond to that when people ask you, particularly about the violence question, and particularly when you are challenging the myths of the founders?
If people don't like it.
People don't like it.
And that chapter, the one that deals with that question. Chip, where are you? How many times did I bring that up? 5, 6. Yeah, okay. It's about reaching the point where you're willing to do whatever it takes to escalate to direct action, whatever form that takes, and whatever consequences of that are. Because I really wanted to look at genre, because this is about whether people should support genre, and it all came down to a very question for us in dealing with this. Do you support violence? You're buying guns. He's a violent gun. You can't support that. And I thought about 2 things with that. And because what I did was that I went to the people whom really mattered for the question. This question. And once I found that as a part of a process, that resistance efforts don't move at scale, move in a big way to match a big. And that's a tougher conversation. When they get over the interruption points, when they get over the legal point, and maybe they support something that's underground railroad, and you've got to support something that even when it's legally get past that choke point. But then that last choke point is when all of these channels in fact fail, and the abuse just continues, when the courts fail, when fails, when every single channel not only proves to be ineffective, but in fact has been forcibly closed against you, and the abuse can recognize that the violence is there. I follow by people who are saying, people like Thomas Wayne, how possibly support John Brown? How do you possibly engage in violence? How do you possibly go ahead and support this? And Higginson points out, friends, how many millions? As a can protect your own precious conscience by not giving me $10 so that I can help John Brown, and you can go to bed at night, thorough into the stratosphere. That's okay with you? Meanwhile, these people are being brutalized. That violence is okay. You can accept that violence. You can accept people being disappeared. That violence is okay. But and their argument was that this isn't about violence. This is about doing whatever it is that's absolutely necessary to stop the abuse, because it's the response to standing in that results in a consequence that could be violent, right? Destruction of property, and that's the kind of conversations that you got to get into. Well, what do you mean property? You mean blowing up a target, or do you mean harm to people? And that was part of the toughest that, and why I spent a lot You accept that harm to yourself or harm to others as a possible, if not a probable outcome of your direct action, the moral weight of that is enormous, and you can't. Nobody does it easily. That you have to think like the state law already being used. The cost of doing nothing are even higher, and so that's why one of the it really is in many ways because it's also about in a major way how they do and they don't successfully do that. They're not able to come up with most of them are not able to come up with a moral framework for doing that. We know about what John Brown's moral. This is not a full and contested question about his strict Christianity. But these guys, transcendentalists, I'm not saying a moral framework there, but what they found is that the moral framework for both of those things the most weighty kind of existential issues. It wasn't enough. Did and didn't resolve. So some of them didn't resolve it. They thought it was okay. They were able to kind of live with it, not comfortably, but live with it. Why? Because they were able to achieve what it is they want to achieve. The question is about: are you willing to do whatever it takes to end the abuse, and then accept whatever the possible consequences of that are, even no matter what they are? You have to be clear-eyed about it. You can't just close your eyes and say, "Well, whatever comes, comes." No, you can't do that either. To be responsible about this and understand what's going on, you have to understand what it means to go ahead and buy a box of Sharps rifles and give it to John Brown. You can't close your eyes about exactly what he's going to use Sharps rifles for. But to understand that in fact is in furtherance of this crucial bigger goal. And that's why trying to get all of you to try to sort of see who you are in that discussion. Are you Garrison? Are you Frederick Douglass? Where are you in that? Because then we can all find where we are in that point and what we might or might not be willing to live with. But if the abuse is of such a scale that it is impacting people's lives in this massive way, it is this fundamental evil. Then understanding whatever it takes you have to be willing to do that. And for these folks, right? They crossed that line, and some of them paid for it. One of them went crazy, and like you sort of see exactly what they did. But if they don't do it, when anybody gets you a conversation about John Brown and these guys, ask them. But it's not happening. You're not on their side. You're not on their side. Abraham Lincoln's plan for ending slavery would have ended in 1900. His gradual manumission that was based upon the British model, the amendments that he introduced in December of 1863, would have ended it by 1900. Okay with that?
And this gets back to what you do talk about in your book, this sort of retroactive myth making. We have the evidence of what Lincoln would have done, and yet still to this day the myth stays, right? That like no, he was on the side in the Emancipation Proclamation, but he was forced, or not he, but like the situation was forced through violence. And when I'm teaching on race, media, and international affairs, like so around this time is also when the development of mass media is happening in America. So we were looking at the role of the newspapers, and we saw how specifically when you're talking about William Lloyd Garrison, for instance, and the abolitionists who are using pamphlets. We also don't know, and this is something that I have to learn very recently, that even the abolitionist press, the pamphlets, was one of the most successful campaigns, media campaigns in history. That it would have been on par with if we were studying with some of the most successful campaigns, they were sending millions of pamphlets throughout the South, right? But we also see on the other side that newspapers were actively using their pages to send moms after the abolitionists. They sent lynch mobs to New York to try to kill William Lloyd Garrison. So part of even when and this gets to the next point that I have about when you talk about our liberal nationalist problem, I see this all the time with how we even lionize the role of journalism in this country and how we whitewash some of the very, very, very destructive role that mainstream newspapers have had in this country, right? And I think part of what is challenging, but we have no choice but to go through it, is we are having to look at these histories of our institutions when the evidence has been there all along, right? That, for instance, the Postal Service was actively suppressing news about the Haitian Revolution so that it would not reach slaves, right? Preventing Black postal workers from carrying news about slave rebellions, so that erasure is happening, in real time. But again, this gets to where you're talking about the main obstacle to understanding American resistance, and I will quote: "The main obstacle is not conservative triumphalism. Few serious historians buy that anymore. It is liberal nationalism, the belief that American institutions are fundamentally legitimate, even when they fail particular groups at particular times. Liberal nationalists will condemn slavery. They'll admit that the Constitution compromised with it. They'll acknowledge institutional racism. But they won't follow that logic to its conclusion, that a constitutional order built on these compromises, legitimized by founders who enslaved people and conducted genocide, was itself illegitimate." So, yes, part of this, and part of the challenge I'd imagine even today, and I'd be curious what you think about this, is part of what we are being asked upon to draw upon is the legitimacy of the fourth estate of the media. This is what journalists, and this is what journalism is supposed to do, drawing upon our legal system, yes, right, it was designed to protect all of us. How much of this is, because how do you think about drawing upon ultimately you're asking for people's faith and hope. How do you do that while also having to confront reality, I suppose? And I've been thinking about this a lot, in the sense that if we're being really honest about getting out of this mess, we have to confront realities, but we haven't created, I would argue, a new narrative, a new story with which we can find inspiration and something larger to fight for. Yeah, and there's a whole bunch of questions in there. I guess, back to mid and almost like how does this work? Again, confronting the realities, and if you're following this to the conclusions, so much of what America is based on is illegitimate and deserves to be resisted. In fact, it might be our obligation to resist what this country was built upon. How do you do that and yet deal with people who might see their own identities and what they're believing collapsing in real time?
Yeah, this is the kind of thing that makes
We got
parties.
me too.
But this idea, particularly when you're talking about it's a process of deconstruction, essentially. I particular form of American political so bound up into the stories we tell about ourselves and our relationship that we are. Nobody, in fact, has their political identity, their political behavior in some way connected to what it means to be American, what it means to so many people. It comes back to a kind of idea that we are exceptional. We are the last best hope of freedom. about the work that does. Think about the work it does in your mind and in your behavior. And everybody around you, to the rest except things. But that's the nationalism, right? That's the storytelling, because it's all a story. We're outside the realm of history. Karen pointed out Haitian rebellion. That doesn't make it fine to make sure that the impact of that lesson isn't making the people who could use it to warn them about how things are in fact working or could work. Right? They're suppressing hope in real time. A lesson in real time. Like they're suppressing hope that their condition can change so they can do something about it. This isn't just suppress history, hope in real time.
Yeah, well, even today.
And we can resurrect that hope.
Well, even today, the World Cup, FIFA banning Haiti. Yeah.
Really?
So, right, saying that that was political.
Yeah.
And they were banned from putting out other costumes. So.
The thing is that, and I keep saying it, what work is that doing? What work is that? That's not about your Haitian team. What work is it doing to have Toussaint Louverture, who's been dead for 200 years?
Yes.
He's still dangerous. Doesn't that make you want to know why? Doesn't that make you want to know more about him? More about what that Haitian this way in the Western Hemisphere? This is the shit. You should know about him. As a product of this moment, start talking about sort of a non-national moment. This is a product of the everywhere. And it's going on to him, and he's seizing on these ideas, and he's damn well doing something about it. But for a second to think that his example is dangerous now. Maybe. Somebody thinks so. Right? It's a political statement. A political statement about what?
About who's that the front revolution, but Haiti,
Yep.
former colonies trying to liberate themselves from the French. But yeah, I mean, this speaks to how memory and erasure is a can take centuries. But now let's we're gonna get into real shit. Let's get into real shit.
Is that what it came?
Yeah, let's get
You
into
don't buy this book.
Well, so liberal, Democrat, whatever. But let's say, MAGA may see Trump as their legitimate. I'm very curious, when they're talking about to resist, and of course people will say, well, we'll just vote our way out of this. Trump will. What do you think about when, will all this be fixed once Trump is gone? Maybe that's a dumb question. I think strategic or typical point of view. Are there actual, do things actually get more dangerous for us? When and how? It seems like y'all already know the answer. Maybe this is a question and answer period. But from this sort of, particularly that we're in a moment where a uniquely sort of, that the system wasn't, well, I don't know if that's true. Would you say the system was not designed for someone like Trump? Or was it uniquely, or did Trump uniquely manipulate holes that were already there? And, or how should we be thinking about the post-Trump future now?
Historians make terrible fortune tellers. We are not organizers, we're not political analysts, and we are if we are not fortune tellers. We can talk about patterns, and we can talk about recognizing those patterns. When you look, and so I have my main response, given the fact that it is occupying almost every synapse that I have, is very bad.
Yes.
Does everyone know what's going on in Prairie? Can you explain?
Prairie land defendants, 2 days ago, 8 people convicted and sentenced as domestic terrorism. Bear with it. Domestic terrorism and conspiracy to engage in terrorism. Based upon what evidence? None. One wasn't even there. This is 7 people who went to a facility in Texas. One of whom wasn't even there. Time goes off. Somebody was holding that rifle. Some people trickle on that rifle, and it wounded a police officer. $100 years. Another person, 70 years. 5 other people, 80 years. Means about Antifa in a box, 30 years. Why? Expressly on the part of the judges. Why? Message about what protest is available here. And about how these people who are engaged in a protest that is deeply of Antifa, they disrupt and take apart this United States government. But now it's a legal fact. This is a slam about what it means. This is one of the most important judicial decisions in history. This is a historical decision. They finally actually got it put down into law because they just convicted people of it. Now what can you do about protest? Imagine. How many of you own black sweatshirts? On your phone. Don't put your hands up to this. He was carrying a box and he wasn't there. 30 years. For them to send a message about the present Antifa, this impossible possibility, and what it means protest. Only peaceful protest is allowed in this country, meaning only protest that has no help whatsoever in changing anything. That's the kind of protest that they allow, and they want to make sure they are sending that message. He was appointed George W. Bush. He's been sitting on the bench for 20 years. When we think about the Supreme Court right now, I know about it because they're going to shove it in our face anyway, right? I mean, this is about something we got to deal with. How many something else? I look at it as an act of storytelling about what America is, Better Angels of Our Nature. Better Angels of Our Nature doesn't sign a kid with a box for 30 years and says that it's anti-American and convict him because it's anti-American. That happened 2 days ago. Just as the candidates who beat the Democratic establishment candidates in New York. Whatever you want to say about the DSA or the Democratic Socialists, it's not about that. It's about the kind of the same brush that's being painted about the plain about the sentence. The same exact language was immediately turned against those successful candidates. Think about that.
the same exact language deployed by the same people in the same way. All of a sudden, these candidates for Congress are associated with a proven sentence. This isn't a Donald Trump problem.
No, but isn't Antifa, wait, Antifa, pro-American? I mean, I thought Antifa was what we.
Well,
I mean, if I got it all wrong?
Yeah.
no.
Well, I was gonna say, we can get to this in question and answer, but we have a few minutes. So this is perfect, and perhaps where we interact, or interact in the sense of constantly having to think. And you say this in your second sort of diagnostic point, right? Take the weight when authority claims the power to define itself. Your commitment to truth, even at great cost, of all resistance, right? So when they get a chance, exactly like with being anti-fascist, but now it's become something that can be used against you in the court of law and criminal. And how long has it taken Antifa to become now a
Administration.
Mhm.
Since the last time.
Would you maybe argue, I guess we say read the book to figure out all the nine diagnoses. Part of what you talk about is that resistance has a window with which to act, with which to translate individual ideas into organized resistance, but then to solidify those ideas into new institutions, right? So how much of what we're seeing is the other side, if we're really watching, they're seizing their moment. Right? They're seizing their moment and they are acting, as you said, if we're going to take the premise that they see this as their chance, resistance to consolidate power, they have to, when resistance finally achieves power, as you say, it must act with ruthless clarity and speed to transform structures. And that's included the judiciary, included the media, obviously the rapid takeover of capture, I would say, of places like the Washington Post, right? So I guess my question is, when you're looking at resistance, you're looking at particular digital technologies, right? Particularly the role of social media, of spreading messages, of spreading narratives. I know you're not your fortune teller, but how do you see the alignment of technology and how the oppressive structures have really as a challenge now that may be different than anything you've seen before?
Part of it was part of the old playbook. Is that, and if you read Jason Stanley. This one's no, it's testing.
Use your teacher voice.
Yeah. I can deal with it. Testing. Whatever. I mean, but the idea is that if you read Jason Stanley and Snyder, some scholars sort of think about this. I mean, the first step that authoritarians make is to disrupt your idea of reality so they can control it. They can control that, they can control almost everything else. It's sort of why it's important. Why I put it forward in the book. This is what I'm understanding. You have to, when I was in the Army, sort of, you have to find the signal in the noise, right? And how important it is to sort of maintain that hold on reality, because that's the first thing they're going to take away from you, because that is the main way in which they'll try to manipulate the world, and therefore how you can act in it. But when we talk about technology, I think it's really interesting because we can really focus on the acceleration of everything, the acceleration of both information, but more to the point, the acceleration of disinformation, and not just disinformation, but the actual destabilization of what's real and what's not. This is
Yeah, it's beyond.
yeah, this is beyond that. This is when AI has reached this point of sophistication. But the one thing that is doing now that is extraordinarily powerful and gives us a tool that resistors of the past didn't have, is that it breaks down the other thing that authoritarians use, and as they use to try to distort that reality, to make you feel alone. Make you feel like you're the only one getting this. You feel like you have nobody else to lean on. Because the tools of isolation have been so successful in the past. But what they can't do is they can't stop the sense of community that you can build using these tools. You can connect to people now. You can have an ally in Hawaii from here that you never knew you had. You're not alone. You're able to connect with them. You're able to connect with somebody in other parts of the country that are now, you've got your tribe. And that is a powerful function of how this kind of technology can work. And that's something that I don't think they've really found too much a way to go ahead and stop it from shutting down the internet. But in terms of, I don't want to say it's a wash in terms of the forces for good that technology unleashes and the forces for evil that it does. I think that's a complicated discussion, and you know that so well. I think that the more clear thing is the benefit of community that it can in fact generate, by making sure that people are not alone. And it is in that sense that not just, oh my gosh, in fact I'm a part of a big thing, just to be able to say, I am not alone in this. Somebody else is in it with me. Somebody else thinks like I do. I have somebody else out there. I am not alone are three of the most powerful words in resistance. And that's something they can't do.
Turned off the internet.
Sorry?
They turn off the
Turned off the
internet.
internet. I mean,
Yeah.
worry
Yeah.
about that.
Yeah, it's and like you said that, I mean, I think even in my experience even with RSS building this, I also felt alone and powerless with all the cancellations, and all of us was to say, hey, would anyone take this class? And I would have been happy with teaching under Teresa, honestly, but to see hundreds of people, right, say yes, it only gives not just me, but everybody else a sense of like, oh wow, like we can do this and we can actually create better structures, right? Structures in which people can learn without having to go into lifelong debt, right? Or access to teach without having to deal with starvation wages, basically.
Yeah, but one of the things that you're doing, I mean, you're actually doing so much in terms of resistance. Why I love you, right? Why I really want to have you here. I mean, what she represents personally, but also in her work, is part of resistance action and resistance in action, which she's doing with her resistance studies course. 1,500 people?
Yeah.
And when did you start?
When did you start? Around a year ago.
This isn't just about building the skills in order to have people understand the world around them and race and media and this kind of literacy that Karen is working on. This is about building parallel institutions. I mean, she was talking about is that you don't have to go through a credentialed institution in which you're paying millions of dollars, thousands of dollars, millions of dollars, right, to do this. Karen is building a parallel institution to give you the tools to do this. This is what we're talking about, folks. So it's not like there aren't examples here that you can see about resistance working in your lives and the world around you. The thing is, you're not hearing enough about it.
Yes. Similarly, like setting out to change, I just was like, I just want to teach, and also giving other people a way to participate. I think not everyone can march up to Columbia or the Washington Post and to be able to meet with them. But we can sit and learn. And I think one thing that has been really really great about it is how many, even just the fact that I don't feel alone right now is enough. And yeah, and we get to, sure, we get to have a plus. It's also use that as of voices from mainstream media, particularly we've seen this before in history, the purging of Black voices from media, and how it is just very for anybody paying attention that the attacks on DEI, on CRT are very much part and parcel of eliminating, particularly Black voices, but women as well, from the public sphere. Right, and so as we're seeing these structures in many ways behave as they've always been designed, and having to, I think part of it is having to resist while grieving, right, and having to deal with the grief, having to deal with fighting, frankly, the nostalgia. Like I told y'all earlier today when we were outside, I'm like, y'all, the old post is gone. It's gone, dead and buried. Grieve your losses, but we gotta, and we're already seeing new independent news outlets moving into the space. Shout out to the 51st. I don't know, right? Those folks in here. Yeah, right. Independent media. We're seeing people, individuals and other outlets moving into the space and creating new structures. So it'll be interesting to see where we're at 2 years from now. But I think part of what has to be done and being clear-eyed, as we were talking about, almost militaristic and clear-eyed about the situation, is that certain parts of who we thought we were are just gone. Are just gone. Even if it's Biden, even if it's just Trump, we can't unsee what we've seen in the last couple of years, right? And so this is also again why I think it's so critically important for people to be writing right now, to be doing physical books, is that it makes it so much harder to erase us. It makes it so much harder for them to erase us in real time. I'm grateful that you've also, like I said, given this isn't just a book. At the end, there's an actual toolkit for. I think part of this is media literate, like asking the questions. You are making these certain claims about America. How, right? Asking I think these are very good, even media literacy standpoints. But how even what is happening that we can ask better questions, and that we can get the emotional resilience. I think because this is going to be a long fight, and part of what the do is it's a war of attrition. It's a war of young. So yes, I appreciate this. Last thing, and I I missed the. Let's do. All right, let's have the blue.
How do you filter that down? Because even at my age, I'm 65, the lies growing up. How do we do that change?
Yeah, good question. Exhale. Training. Learn how to do the craft of journalism, but you're only as good as the education that you've gotten. You're only as it is complete historical context. If you're never learning about the erase resistance movements, you don't know. That carries into the cover. So for me, I guess as a journalist, I'm recognizing like there's so much that I've never learned about even. So I guess there's a reason why I wanted to teach during summer and fall was so that I could get teachers into my class so that maybe, you know, that way, right? So that I want journalists in the class so that they can think differently, and hopefully this could be a bit of a force, I suppose, so that they feel like even if you can overhaul, especially during red states, like I had some of them who were like, okay, we took what we learned from the class and fit it in a little bit in this social studies unit for 8th graders, right? Like things like that. And I'm like, look, school you've had, how many PhDs you've had. We are all in remedial history. We're all in summer school because we are not educated. So people who come in with a bit about it, I'm like, holy shit, like, I don't know this. I'm doing this so that I can learn with you in real time, right? So that's part of it. Understanding that we are all deconstructing right now. And yeah.
I think it's about, I can certainly get back on that. I think that it's where people are and about being as empathetic as we could possibly be. Empathy has left the building for the most. It's less about teaching content than about teaching folks how. It's about those kind of critical thinking. That's about building their own kind of intellectual. That really gets to be known the most isn't about learning about my take on students for democratic society, although I can do that. What is the thinking process that you can use to break apart this document, break apart this argument, to actually see again the work it's doing, and that's the kind of teachers of others. And so it's about a process of thinking being more important to me than about.
I'd like to answer your question. I thought it was brilliant. I think, if I heard you right, you said, how do we filter it down? The most important word is there, how do we? I think that each of us can pick up the book and out the book. Take up the book. I don't have to as building something. We're building the fact that we can do this together.
Okay, thank you. Watching YouTube and your social media, and said on some of the videos is that you consider the civil rights movement to be the last effective resistance movement in America. And so I picked up the book a couple of that. What are the lessons from the civil rights movement that we should look at right now and apply today?
Okay. The original book was 21 chapters. To plus rights movement about lessons for resistance act up. And it also included Standing Rock and included so the lessons from that, the one thing that I wanted to keep in mind, the reason why I truncated it, I made a statistic about this. The framework and how the civil rights movement is fighting, it's not able to achieve more, is because it's bumping up on the choke points, it's bumping up on the interruption points. It's still, as much as it achieved, it was still temporary. And it's temporary that are established in that first period. And the civil rights movement, though, actually support most. Rosa Parks wasn't tired. I mean, she's tired in an existential way, but she's tactical, she's specific. She's been working in this for a decade. She knows exactly what she's doing to spark that. It is being clear-minded by the rights movement and the civil rights movement. I mean, these antecedents are in the 30s, 40s, 50s. These people were day in and day out understanding that the moral market doesn't have all the time. And so to really see how that the problem that they ran into, but the leaders were clear-eyed enough to understand this. They didn't move enough comfortable white people to get broader structural change. And that's not their fault. That's a structural problem. And until we start addressing the structural problem, then that doesn't become permanent or more longer lasting. And so that's kind of the lesson. So it's not only about the strong those ceilings are, even against the most talented, smartest people that our country's produced, but it's also about against the odds that we put on people, that they're able to achieve what they could, because they do all of these things. Talk about carrying moral weight. And so when we think about, we also think about and about how the mythology and how the narrative starts spinning you. It's not peaceful. But you think the deacons are peaceful?
No.
And did they allow others to in fact engage in nonviolent protest? So we need to kind of hold all that together to understand the choices that they're making. And so it includes both sort of the best of resistance, but it also includes the worst of resistance in what it represents points that are still at work in America. Calais. And that shows you what those limitations were. It couldn't be.
Can't be only incumbent on the populations that are abused to carry all of the right need to right. And I had this conversation. I only recently learned about the white martyrs from the civil Prussian structure doesn't want you to learn about those allies that were willing to go and pay the ultimate price, because then that gives you that there were, and we needed that. We don't learn that the Viola loses death at murder actually helped to pressure BJ to, okay, now we gotta do something. So like, who do we know? Who are even the white allies that are erased from history? Speaking of erasure, we are being told that it is time to end.
There's one thing that I want to that I would like to point out. My good friends, my allies, those who are really doing so much to fight, and that's Veterans Who Fight for White Fashion.
Oh yes.
These guys are bedrocks of doing this. So please follow them and put a thank you, Chris.
Veterans 3DC folks here, awesome. So yeah, we've got so many local groups.
Right.
That's good. Give up because I know what that's
this book. You should have been up here the whole time. But there's no way that they're going to be pushed back. You've got you as an example. How the hell did they be pushed back?
Well, also that you remember.
And you remember, right? Well, wow, we say wow, right?
Wait. Well, yes.
That is a book that I will talk to my family about.
Thank you.
All right, well.
Signing line will start just to the right here. Books are available for purchase at the register if you have. Are you going, Matt?
Hey friends, I'm gonna keep the live going while we're doing this. In a couple minutes, once I get my own signed, so just stick with it. Thanks all for being part of this conversation with us. Hey, I know I said I'd leave it on while we're getting books signed. I don't want you guys to have to sit there for an hour while we go get our books signed. Go have a good night. It's Friday night, everyone. Go enjoy your evenings. Thank you for being here and listening to Karen Ataya and Tad Stormer talk about Tad's new book, Resistance History of the United States. Please, I would recommend going to get your own copy. It is going to also be added in as part of the Anti-Fascist Book Club. So if you are with us on the Anti-Fascist Book Club and with me and Chris and Tara and Steph Wilson and others who are part of it, get your copy as well, because it's going to be one of the books that we're going to read coming up. And and as Chris Goldsmith said, get 2 copies so that you can have a pristine one and read it, and the other one you can rip that back section out, which is the resistance guide, and you can have it with you. It's almost like a pocket constitution. It's a pocket guide to resistance. So thanks everyone for being here. Thank you all. I really appreciate all of you spending your Friday evening with me. Listen to Karen and to listen to Tad. I'll show you a little bit here too while we're standing We're in DC right now at the Politics and Prose Bookshop, which is a cool name. I really like the name. Thanks, Court. I will be safe. I'm going to continue having fun. I'm going to be here for the morning tomorrow, and I'm going to try and do a sit-down interview session with some of the other folks from Veterans Fighting Fascism who are still here. That might not be live. I may just do as a pre-recording and put out for everyone, but please go have a great weekend. Go do something anti-fascist, which means in this case, it's the thing that I have been asking of everyone, is go call your senators and your representative in the federal government and follow the script that we have on Sick of This Shit Publications to demand that the Olmstead decision be codified into law for the Americans with Disability Act to protect our rights and freedoms and your rights and freedoms, to prevent us from being forced, reinstitutionalized, segregated, and discriminated against. Karen and Tad were just talking about segregation and discrimination and the ongoing impacts and effects of that. Well, it's fucking back. It's back, guys. That's what Stephen Miller wants. That's what they're going to do. That's what they're pushing for. It's eugenics. It is part of American history. It is a big part of our history. So go use that link that Courtney just dropped into the chat for everyone. I won't put it immediately into this post because I'm just going to, once it's ready, I'm going to have Substack put it out. So please, once it's out though, share it. You can find it. It's pinned on my webpage on sickofthis.substack.com. Go there, read the scripts. They're super easy. It takes 30 seconds, maybe a minute to call your representative or your senators and talk to them. You can get it done within 3 to 5 minutes. Like, it's not hard. You also feel really good, and then you do it again. And then you do it again. And then you do it again and again and again and again, and we're going to build on some of the connections that I've made here. I have emailed the script out to Karen Ataya herself. She is willing to support it and be a part of it. And, sorry, weird police force walking by. Not sure who, not sure why, but they say police. There's also 5 calls. But right now, I ignore 5 calls for a moment unless they are specifically asking you to talk about the Olmstead decision. Because this is one of the largest attacks on freedoms and rights that is coming down right now and immediately. And it will impact so many people. It will impact all of us. Because guess what they just criminalized? Antifa. You know what they're trying to make a mental disorder? TDS. So that you can be locked up and have the key thrown away and forcibly institutionalized if you have Trump derangement syndrome. So we're going to work on getting our script out there even more. Like I said, I've reached out to Karen Ataya. I spoke with her today. I got to meet her today. I've emailed it to her. She's willing to help and support us there too. I spoke with Kira Havens of Citizens Impeachment, got to meet her in person, and she's willing to help too. They're willing to help. These are organizations that can, and people that can do things and create change. It's on us, though, to put that pressure out there. Yes, the state might decide, but I live in Arkansas. Karen lives in Texas. It affects everyone. And so please, 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 go support our initiative and our scripts. We're also going to be working on putting out more of them. Naida and I and the legal team over at Disability Community for Democracy are going to be working together. I'm working in partnership with her and them to get this message out there to as many people. And again, if you know large media organizations who are willing to speak up and do something too, pressure them. The Bulwark has spoken up, has started to speak up. The first of the major new media organizations is a never Trumper Republican one. That says a lot to me. That says that our progressive media is not doing enough, isn't doing anything. So if you are a founder or a paid subscriber at Midas Touch, at Lincoln Square, at any of these new media spaces, message and hound them until they do it. Because the media follows what the people dictate too. Just like the government follows what the people dictate. So go dictate that you demand that we be seen. Speak up now. Speak up loudly. Speak up consistently. And then go have a great night, y'all. Thanks for staying with me. Thanks for being here. Thanks to all of you who listened and were able to make Tad's book release and discussion, or book discussion here at the Politics and Prose bookshop in Washington, D.C. We're right near the National Mall. Thank you, everyone, for joining me. Thank you for being a part of it. Thank you for coming in and listening earlier today as well, while we had our earlier discussion where I got to meet the folks at FLAIR, which is for liberation and resistance everywhere. Yeah, let's do it. Let's do it. All right? Let's go out and be awesome. Let's go have a great night. Not only defend disability rights, but be on offense for them. Codify them into law. That's what we can do. We have that power. This is our turn to make a real impact in America and change the direction that this nation is going. So let's do it. Go have a great night, y'all. Let's be done being sick of this shit, and let's start doing this shit. And don't worry, Clara, I'm not giving up. I will not give up. I'm never going to give up. This impacts me way too deeply. Even if it didn't impact me personally, it impacts me too deeply. I'm a veteran. I served our nation. I sacrificed my body and my mental stability at times, and my marriage for parts of it, I've sacrificed. I'm going to continue to serve. And that's what I'm doing. Now I'm asking you all to serve alongside me. Service doesn't require a uniform. It requires your voice. It requires your mind. It requires your ears. It requires you doing. Service doesn't require a uniform. Service is civic. So, please come support me if you can. Become a paid subscriber if you really can. I would really, really appreciate it. The more paid subscribers we get, the larger the audience we can have, the more visibility we can have in these discussions and this movement, and the more change that we can make. And then I can remain independent. I can remain independent and by myself without any large person or any large platforms behind me. Like I want to be is completely independent at all times. No one says what I can say. No one stops me from saying what I say. I change what I say when it's wrong. I adjust, I fix. You guys know it. I'm here because of you. I appreciate you. I thank all of you. And if you can, please become a paid subscriber. If you can't, just become a free subscriber. Share, restack, forward, like this, do all the things. It'll be out here shortly. And thank you all. Thank you again. Go have a great weekend. We're done being sick of this shit. We're doing this shit. And I'm going to go get my book signed and have a great night and enjoy my night in D.C. And my chance to hang out with some veteran friends and some folks that I have gotten to meet, and it's incredible. Thank you all for being with me. Have a great weekend, y'all. Thanks.